Utopian and dystopian literature are what you can call two sides of the same coin. In this exhibition, we have displayed some for your viewing. This presentation will be an overview of the literature displayed and discussed a bit more in depth in order to understand how they fit into a utopian or dystopian trope. To begin, Integral Cooperation was written by Albert K. Owen himself. In these pages, they include specific rules and regulations in order for their utopia to manifest in reality. The ideals portrayed in Integral Cooperation were seemingly more grounded in the fact that some, if not all, the ideas were applied to reality in the colony of Topolobampo, regardless on if they were achievable or not. This pamphlet, A Dream of an Ideal City, was written by Albert Kinsey Owen himself in 1897. It describes the ideals of what Owen perceived as a utopian city. There is both a finished version and a rough draft of the pamphlet. As seen in the rough draft of his work, he writes, "I love to dream of the citizens in a large community, being associated for their lives' work in one great firm, incorporated to build, by and for themselves, the best appointed, the most beautiful, and the greatest city on earth." This idea, although beautiful when put to the test, did not stand as firm as Owen had planned. Although in abstract thought his utopian city was achieved in perfection, the reality of the inclusion of others who shared different perspectives of what utopia was to them was bound to clash against his. Furthermore, the reality of the environment of Topolobampo at the time, with political strife and terrible land conditions, hindered a lot of plans Owen had for this ideal city. Ray Reynolds, the writer of Cat's Paw Utopia, which discusses the events of Topolobampo, described the water as brackish and sulphurous, which was kept in dirty, uncovered barrels that, although became undrinkable, but too precious to be thrown away, was used for cooking. This shows that not only is the perspective of utopia different, but also the essence upon the manifestation of utopia. Once it becomes reality, it changes from the abstract idea of perfection. This is important to think about because the idea of a utopia, or a paradise, if acted upon, can possibly become a dystopia for others in the case of Topolobampo. We need to be cautious about carrying out utopian ideas unless we plan to progress through these imaginations. This novel, titled Looking Backward, was written by Edward Bellamy in 1887. This version was in the actual Pacific City Library in the Topolobampo colony. It has been noted that Albert K. Owen and Bellamy knew each other and bounced ideas off of one another. However, it is still argued as to who came up with their utopian ideals first, because of how similar both seem to be. Paralleling similar ideals to Owen's own A Dream of an Ideal City, Bellamy's Looking Backward showcases an ideal society in which the protagonist, Julian West, a man born into an aristocratic family in the 19th century, suffers from insomnia. He enlists the aid of Dr. Pillsbury, a mesmerist, who puts him to sleep. He wakes up in the 20th century, where a new utopian world has taken shape. Here, Julian finds a wonderful new life where everyone has equal access to everything, and the needs of the many are more so thought about than the needs of one. Bellamy uses Julian's experience in the 20th century as a critique of the 19th century world. Although it can be assumed that Bellamy has been inspired by Owen's ideas, it can also be argued that Bellamy's utopia was actualized through writing, whereas Owen's failed when it manifested into reality, where outside sources of dystopian societies could contaminate it, thus rendering it a failed utopia. Furthermore, because there was a copy of Bellamy's novel within their library, it can also be assumed that a lot of his ideas also influenced Owen. The difference in perspectives, however, come from the viewpoint in which the utopia is being seen. For example, Julian West saw a utopia from an outsider's perspective, whereas Owen was the creator of his own utopia. Another flip side is Julian eventually became someone who lived in his utopia, whereas Owen created and left the colony to their own devices, hoping they would follow the rules and laws he had implemented before he left on his extracurricular activities. This artifact is important because it shows how similar two ideas can be, but still pertain different messages about utopia. Written by Ayn Rand in 1937 and published in 1938, Anthem speaks of a utopian society where everyone is appointed a job based on their qualities. This idea of appointing jobs based on the qualities of their citizens is something that both Owen and Bellamy seem to push in their respective utopias. However, Anthem takes a different perspective on this type of society. The society in Anthem and Looking Backward are pretty identical. If anything, one could almost compare the ideology behind their societies in both Anthem and Looking Backward as the same thing. The only difference is that in Anthem, the perspective that it takes on within this idea of a utopian society is practically dystopian. Where in Bellamy's Looking Backwards, the protagonist is from another time and is transported to society and enjoys his time, the protagonist in Anthem was born and raised in their respective utopian society. The perspective of someone living in a utopian society differs greatly from someone new who was brought in and shown all the positives. With Topolobampo, there was great dissonance between those who lived within the colony and those who lived outside the colony. The ones outside of the colony only saw the good things that Owen talked about. Granted, eventually the reality of the Topolobampo colony surfaced, and the utopia Owen tried to build was torn down. Here we can see where literature plays an important factor in the tropes between utopian and dystopian. Whereas the previous literatures were seen as utopian from the basis of their respective authors, Anthem is written as a warning about civilizations that are seemingly perfect. This is a huge trope in dystopian literature, where utopias look at the positive aspects of potential perfection of civilization. Dystopian literatures, such as Anthem, serve more as a warning. This novel, written by George Orwell in 1949, is a cult classic. 1984 shows how a utopian society can quickly become a dystopian society. In the novel, everything is ran by the mysterious Big Brother. The party, who is under Big Brother, is in charge of keeping the society in line by making sure that those whose ideals are not aligned with their regime is dealt with. They are able to do this through constant surveillance. Winston Smith, the protagonist, is a member of the middle-class outer party. Throughout the novel, it can be seen that Winston started to think his own thoughts, but not only that, he also starts to write them on paper. This is a very dangerous thing to do due to the constant surveillance. Eventually, certain aspects out of his control start happening, which ultimately leads to his capture. The theme of utopia in literature may be hard to discern from that of dystopian novels due to there being similar tropes within both. A main difference to expect is that there is a difference in viewpoint, as mentioned previously, or the focus of the protagonist within the novel. However, this novel in particular draws a thick line on what dystopian and utopian is throughout its plot. Its warning is significant through the pages. Just like Anthem in 1984 shows a more sinister side to utopian ordeals and does not have much room left for hope, which might be the deciding factor of what causes utopias to thrive. Hope is the center of why utopias are started, but could also be why they ended. Some build utopias in hopes of creating a better society, and others may want to break down utopian ideals in hopes of changing what society's views are. These conflicting ideas is possibly how the two sides of the same coin, utopias and dystopias, have come to be.